And now to talk about the state of leader development in New Zealand's food and fibre sector, we have Chris Parsons and Alan Nelson. Please welcome them to the stage.
So thanks everybody and Paul and Food and Fibre Cove for commissioning this project, which is to look at the state of leadership development in the food and fibre sector and then propose a new way of doing that. So why? Leadership used to look like a chiseled jaw, broad shoulders and someone with all the answers. Reality is the game's changed. Knowledge has increased and is increasing by some counts. Human knowledge doubling every 13 hours. So no one person can have all the answers. And so no longer really is it even possible for a greater mortal to stand above lesser mortals and have the leader with the most followers being actually able to achieve anything. Actually now it's the leader standing in the middle and being able to leverage and mobilise the most brains, the most people. And why is that even, and more so, why is that important to our sector? Well, the way we're treating our people has meant that we've got huge rates of people leaving the sector, more than we can sustain. And when we're in a talent war, we've got to keep as many people as we can to be productive. The Gallup have done, a global organisation, done surveys on the difference between engaged teams that lean in, and teams that lean out, they're disengaged. And I won't go through all the numbers, but just to say that engaged teams are 23% more profitable than non-engaged teams. And if we apply those numbers to the New Zealand food and fibre sector, and we just lift it to just the global averages, we'd be $500 million better off. So there's money on the table. When we look around how we do leadership development in the sector, there's islands of excellence, but there's no real systemised approach. And when we think about how we grow food and fibre, we have some really clever systemised approaches to how we get the best out of our animals, get the best out of our plants. So we don't grow our hoggets the way we grow our people. That feels like a problem. So our hypothesis has been that maybe if we can have a more systemised approach to food and fibre, from a biological perspective, more of an ecosystem, a value web, as Ian said today, more of an ecosystem that actually allows us to develop the potential of our people more effectively, then there's money on the table, but there's also wellness and better outcomes socially and environmentally for New Zealand.
So I'm going to talk about the methodology. So this is a project commissioned by the Cove to rural leaders. So Chris is heading up the project and is still heading up the project, and I'm basically the co-researcher. Now I'm handing out my business cards not just to be cheeky, although it is a bit cheeky. It's actually, if you have any feedback that you want to contribute, I wanted to give you my contact details, so that's why they've been passed around. But the methodology, so how have we sort of gone about this project? So the first stage was second half of last year. We interviewed roughly 40 organisations across the food and fibre sector, so not every organisation, but some of the big players, to get an understanding of, first of all, what leadership development training kind of exists in the sector, what's missing, and then the second part of it is, what do people in the sector think is important when it comes to leadership principles? So we did that last year. As I said, it was roughly 40 organisations, and as a result of that, we put together a report of our findings. So that report is available. You can find it on the Rural Leaders website or the Cove website. It's available there, and it's really good, so you should read it. And then what we did from there is okay, we've got these first set of principles that have come out of the first round of data, but what we want to do is we want to kind of road test that with a wider audience of people. So the first round was predominantly people in kind of more senior positions. So, some of the people in this room, thank you very much, participated in those interviews. But we wanted to get views from a much broader range of people. So the first half of this year, we've been going around running focus groups across the country, doing our best to get a real diverse group of people into different rooms to kind of share the findings, test them, what's missing, what's right, what isn't, what do we need to add, and as well as that we ran a survey. So we've got a whole lot of responses via survey and then a whole lot of responses via focus groups. So at this stage, we've literally just finished that data collection. Again, if anyone would like to still contribute, please contact me directly. But we now have kind of a massive wad of data that we're in the process of now wading through. So that's where we're at.
So some of the findings, just in terms of the state of leadership from that initial data, and sort of alluding to what I've just said, is there is a lack of sort of a systemised approach. Again, islands of excellence, where are the big gaps? One, in terms of the quantum of leadership we're doing, we're underserved. Two, big gaps around the operational level of leadership. And then there's probably an area to discuss around the different genres or applications of leadership as well. So as you sort of get into the more sort of advanced thinking about it, leading in an advocacy role or an industry good role is more about sort of bringing consensus and people with you, whereas in a governance perspective, it's more about the clarity of decision making. Or if you go to sort of entrepreneurial leaders, it's all about purposeful risk-taking and mobilising your cohort, getting buy-in. So again, leadership's not just an app that you download, put on your phone and you've got it nailed. It's a lifetime's journey.
So the findings, again, this is from the first round of data, was that there were a whole lot of kind of principles that were identified, and Chris is going to talk to those in a moment. But in addition to that, there was sort of some additional kind of contextual things that came out of it. So if we were going to do, leadership development across the sector in a systemised approach, what are some of the kind of fundamentals behind that? So the first one is around, and I love, by the way, that a lot of the things on the board have actually been discussed by other speakers already this morning or today. So one is around professionalising the industry. There was a real common thread from the people that we spoke to, is that how do we turn this industry into kind of not the, the just a farmer thing. It's like, I'm a farmer, and it's like a really proud professional thing to have. So that's kind of ties in with, I think was it Ian that mentioned it, in terms of how do you almost, not necessarily add fancy letters, but how do we do something to take it to really professionalise it? That was a need that came out. The second need that came out in the interviews was around, we need our leaders to have a more strategic perspective and to have a much wider perspective. So it's not just about how do you become a leader and do a good job at leading the people in your organisation. How do you actually have an idea about what's going on in other organisations in your sector? How about beyond the sector, and then even taking a global look at it? How do we have that kind of much wider lens as opposed to just focusing on your organisation? So that was the second thing that came out. The other one was around leadership matters. This gets me really excited. I love Josh's phrase, so I'm unreasonably excited about this particular topic. And how do we get the best out of people? How do we deliver people fantastic experiences in the workplace where they can be their best selves and therefore do their best work, which is economically a great outcome. And what was neat is that every single person that we spoke to for this research was like, yeah, the stuff matters. We got some feedback around some of the barriers. So sometimes there are barriers around the word leadership. It doesn't resonate with everybody. Some people kind of think, oh, well, I don't look like that tall, broad-shouldered, chiseled person, so I guess I'm not a leader. It's actually understanding that leadership is about getting the best out of people and then achieving outcomes. And the way that that's done looks differently for every single person. It's not kind of one mould. So that was sort of part of this conversation, is that leadership matters, but how do we make sure people understand that everyone has a role when it comes to leading? It's not just about the person with the title or the person who does the hand chopping. The fourth point around the levels and type of leadership required, so Chris talked to that briefly before, but what was interesting is that there wasn't sort of one particular area that they're like, oh yes, we definitely need to train leaders at this level. Kind of the conversations covered every single level of leadership. So the data was presented that, yep, we really need to make sure we train our leaders at that very kind of grassroots, all the way through to we really need leaders to be trained at the sort of strategic or governance end. So that was, I guess, useful to know that there really is a need across all the levels. And then the last one was around this desire to have an ecosystem. So it can't sort of just be this, the silo-based approach to leadership. It needs to be a much, wider perspective. And I love, intentional collaboration, I think, was mentioned as well today, that this has to be a joined-up, systemised approach. So That was everything that came out of the data, not specifically related to the principles. And Chris.
So we talk about the principles. Again, one of the problems when you're studying leadership is that one of the most studied but least understood concepts. And a number of people try and define it. It feels like it's got about 2 or 3 levels. So we could have approached this and said, sort of a more practical, physical sort of approach, and said, here's the top 10 things that successful CEOs do, and so you need to have vision and purpose and good communications. That's important, but it's not enough. We could also have sort of looked at the next layer down and looked at people's hearts and minds, that intellectual and emotional piece, transformational leadership, and again, really, really important. That does change people's lives. It allows people to lean in. But actually, I think as we've gone around and talked to different iwi and others around the sector, we realise there's another layer again, and that's really at that wider level. And that's why leadership is really hard to define, because actually that's very unique to each leader. But the best leaders are when you're bringing your whole self to the table, and that flow between the spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and the physical, if you like. So we've then gone into, well, what's the principle? So not this sort of laundry list of things that leaders do, but actually what's at the heart of food and fibre leadership. And so we got some feedback from that. We've got 6 principles. I won't go through them all, but it's not a laundry list. There's things in here around humble privilege through to leadership's lonely and you come out of it with scars, to what's the utility and the purpose of leadership. And we'd say, well, obviously the utility of leadership is getting things done, right? Succeeding, achieving lofty goals. But the legacy, the purpose, the value of leadership is unleashing the greater potential in others. And your legacy then is that there's more and better leaders that follow you. So we've just gone through a series of focus groups, as Alan said, and now we've boiled it down to 3 things, we think. So this is really keen on your feedback on this. This is sort of hot off the press. So the first one is around knowing and understanding people. So the first person where leadership begins is with yourself, knowing and growing yourself. Again, you don't get the app. This is a lifetime's journey. The second piece then is seeing and understanding others. And then the third piece of understanding people is then bridging the gap between those two so you can bring the best out of others. The second principle is that it's an ethos, really, of service and accountability. So the ideas that sit beneath that is that when you're entrusted with people's lives and their livelihoods, and we are, this is often dangerous what we do. People rely on you, they build their families around the paycheck that you provide, then that's a very, you're put in a position of privilege, and we need to take it seriously. The second idea that comes from that is that therefore leadership's not about importance and not about you being the big person, it's actually about you being accountable. And with that comes this need to again, unleash others. The third principle is building teams. So fundamentally, leadership is a team sport. If you're a team of one, you can't get as much done. So how do we do that? Well, there's sort of 3 things, and I guess we didn't go looking for these 3 things, but actually they fall out a lot from Ellen's PhD research in leadership as well. But the data has sort of fallen into these 3 categories, and they're very sort of primal things that are really important to all people. We've heard them referenced actually a bunch of times today already. So the 3 would be, first one is belonging. That's sort of bringing your whole self. It's not, belonging's different from fitting in. It's about being able to be seen, safe and stretched. That is a basic need for all humans. So that's sort of the fundamentals of teamwork. Autonomy. That's the ability for self-determination, the ability to sort of feel like you're in charge of your own destiny. But equally, that comes with a responsibility. And again, we've heard this today, is that you can't just give people a task but not the skills to complete it. So we have to build the capacity and capability of our teams as well. And then thirdly, purpose. So innately, humans look to make meaning out of what they're doing, have a reason for doing what they're doing. And again, that is sort of central to this idea about building teams. So teamwork, belonging, autonomy, purpose. Just very briefly, one of the other things that came out that we weren't expecting is that a lot of our leadership development across the food and fibre sector is really focused on the individual leader. And oftentimes they get a transformative experience and they go on something like AWDT Escalator, or they might do the the Rabobank Farm Managers course, or even Kellogg Nuffield courses with rural leaders. And then they get back to their organisation and they've grown and the organisation hasn't, and then they leave. How many times does that happen, right? So what if we looked at it in terms of, so that's important, but what if we also look at it in terms of the sort of team leadership? So teams of leaders leaning in. I was speaking to a bunch of owners at Craigmore about 12 months ago, and Buck Shelford was there speaking as well. I asked him, how did you do the leadership thing in the All Blacks? He said, well, we didn't have one leader, we were all leaders. And that actually is the definition, I guess, of high-performing teams. It's not about a group of brilliant people. It's about a team of normal people working together brilliantly. So,
Awesome. So where from here? So there's a couple of practical deliverables from this project, and very excited, third member of the team, Josh, who's been a bit of a star today, sort of featured in a lot of the things. So what we're going to be doing is we've got to deliver a competency model of leadership, which is kind of the principle. So it's like this is sort of the competency of leadership is having these principles. And what I love as well that Chris just said, it's not a laundry list of this is what you need to be a leader. It's actually, no, you be you, but these are the principles of how you deliver leadership and get the best out of your people. The next one is a competency framework. And then finally is a leadership book. So over the next, I think it's due early next year roughly, the idea is we're going to, as I say, wade through all this data and put this kind of best practice leadership handbook together in terms of what we've found from the sector in terms of what matters about leadership in the sector. That'll be a book that hopefully everyone in this room will want to read, but it's it won't necessarily be something that every single member of the sector wants to pick up and have a good old read of. So what we're also planning to do is do kind of a almost like a coffee table type book of it. So sort of a distilled down to the key themes, some key stories, so it's more accessible to more people. So that's sort of the deliverables. And with that, the bit that is exciting, so Josh's part in this team is he's working out how do we credentialise this stuff. So, we've talked about it at the start around professionalising in the industry. It's come up in other talks today as well, is if we're going to provide this leadership development, how do we actually capture that value? So if people learn some skills, how do we make sure that there's, kind of credentials around it? Once that's done, that's kind of the first phase of this project, but the momentum really needs to keep going. And so the idea is that basically leadership providers, it might be some kind of an accreditation process perhaps where the leadership providers sort of use this handbook and that's how they deliver their training. Also the aim is that there kind of becomes like a centre of excellence when it comes to leadership in the sector, so that it keeps this flame alive, it keeps it current, so we're constantly making this up, but like every year or two are we going out to keep testing, is this still relevant, are these still the principles that are needed when it comes to leadership for the sector. And then just going back again to Chris's point, it's about the sector grows food and it grows fibre, it grows plants, it grows animals. How do we do a really, really great job of growing people? And guess what? When we grow people really well, we make more money. So it's commercially and socially smart. Everyone wins, big tick. Thank you.
So just a final, we're going to invite some questions, just a final note. So, again, the game's changed, it's all about people. The Māori word for leader is rangatira. It comes from two words, raranga and tira. It means weaving people together. That's at the heart of what we're trying to do. Kia ora.
Questions, comments? Mitzi, I'll come over to you.
Thank you. Kia ora, Alan and Chris. Thanks for that. Your enthusiasm and energy is fabulous. Can I ask you what's your point of difference? Because you're not the first people to come up with a leadership competency framework or think about credentialing it. And I guess none of us want to see duplication of effort that's already either happening or has already happened.
So you're right. Leadership has been it's a perennial, but we're not doing it. Again, there's lots of people doing lots of good things, but we haven't organised ourselves, and we're in an era of change where just managing the status quo is not going to get us to where we need to be. We actually need to rise above and challenge the status quo. We need an abundance of people that are willing to do that. So, we're certainly not saying we're inventing this topic, but for the times, the ability to try and sort of get concepts, get the need from the sector, do the hard thinking up front, present that in a way that those that are delivering leadership training can, reference the ideas and start to build it in, and maybe start to just muster up some of the effort that we're already putting into this space. You put a bit of a bow on that, call it a leadership institute, call it a leadership alliance or a centre, whatever that is, but let's build something so that we can get some momentum and some focus, and then that becomes the X factor for the sector, hopefully, as we treat people better, as we see beyond the next horizon.
I think just to add to that as well is when we did the first part of research in terms of what stuff exists, again, there's great stuff happening, but what we're trying to do is how do you bring it together? How do you sort of knit these up so it's a system as opposed to great pieces here and there? That's the aim anyway, is to, as Chris said, muster up all the good stuff.
Kia ora. My question's around Māori. You said that you're for challenging the status quo, which is awesome. Māori are often left to the side. So in regards to the research, or the interviews, sorry, how many Māori organisations did you interview or that were involved in this?
So with the first round of data, it was 24% of the organisations were Māori organisations. For the second round, in terms of the focus groups and the surveys, I'll be really upfront, I haven't actually gone through and cut that data yet. What I can say, actually, I think the survey respondents were roughly 10% Māori. We would like more than that. So once we go through and actually, because we captured that data for our focus group participants, I suspect we'll find, we're a little bit underrepresented in this particular demographic, and then we'll go out and be like, right, we need to seek more views from that particular demographic. We did definitely run specific focus groups for Māori, so I'm picking actually we will be relatively well represented there, but if we're not, then we'll make sure we go out and get more views.
Oh, come on. And just another question, again, around Māori. In regards to, I guess, the view on leadership, have you considered incorporating a Te Ao Māori view into what leadership looks like for Māori and how that can be incorporated into what you're doing?
That's very much the aim. So I'm not going to say that we've nailed it or got it perfect, but the more conversations we've had with the Māori organisations around the Te Ao Māori views of leadership, actually I feel like it's kind of the lead, right? So it's about heart, it's about uplifting the mana of other people, it's about the sort of long-term thing, it's about being humble, it's all the views that we've got from Māori organisations seems to be kind of like, well, this is the excellence, how do we incorporate that wider? You might want to...
Is that...
Kia ora korua, George Makpatama from Concove. I got a question before I put forward a provocation. Leadership is something I'm very, very passionate about and feel like I've been trying to write and learn more about it forever now. But the question that I have, and it's a question I've been trying to answer for a long time, that if leadership is the answer, what was the question? So I've always find that quite a really good starting point, because a lot of the stuff, and excuse me for saying this, that has come out of leadership seems to me as a rehashing, regurgitation towards trying to answer something, right? So what was the answer? So my provocation is simply this. I think that leadership is part of the problem. That our fixation over the many years that we've traveled has become a problem. And one of the things that I bring to this conversation and I've been writing about is that for myself as an Indigenous Niuean person, that's a foreign concept. There's no such thing in Niue that talks about leadership. What we talk about is collectivism. So when I talk and unpack it, I'm talking about a position from individualistic to a collectivism. And applying individualistic into my will, it's not going to work. It has shown time and time again it doesn't work. So this is very much, I suppose, it's the challenging of the paradigm or the archetype that we continue to look for. And I heard it time and time again, we've got to sharpen leadership. And I've heard that for my years since I've been in Aotearoa. But I suppose it's how far are we walking towards bringing the collective archetypes into the space? Because that's the thing that I think must address the collective problems we have today. But an invitation, I think, like I said, it's, I don't know whether there was a question or anything in there, but it's just a thought that much needs to be considered if you're really going to make a difference for folks like Māori and Pasifika, because we think and operate in a very, very, very different environment to leadership, in my view.
Can I have a crack and then let Alan have his... I think we're 100% in agreement. When I opened and said, leadership used to look like the chisel jaw, broad shoulders, person standing above the others, and actually leadership is within, and it's about the collective team and how we unlock and create the potential of the team. Why we finished with this concept about team leadership, I think that sounds like we're on the same waka. What's the question? So if problems are bigger than one person can solve, then we need to work as a team that takes people as individual or leaders collectively, but often there's one person that can kind of be the heart of that, to galvanise people into serving that purpose and solving that problem. So leadership gets things done, but ultimately would say the value, so that's the utility. The value, though, is that we're lifting everybody else up so that they can be more than they thought they could be. If I could give one little case study, Alan might jump onto this. We were doing a volunteer task to help evacuate Afghans from Afghanistan just after the Taliban took over last 2021. There was no leader in our team, although Alan kept us all on track. Purpose was our leader, I would argue, and we all, as team members, served that purpose.
Just to add as well, I like that you've answered that question, because I think leadership, it's sort of, in a lot of our minds, we're like, oh, a leader is like this person who is really confident and is sort of all these things, but it's about getting the best out of people. And that's why we're, kind of adding a chapter to this book around high performance teams, because that's like a really big part of this conversation. And it's leadership, but it's sort of at its heart this idea of like it's growing people. So how do we grow people to be the best versions of themselves and do their best work in an organisation? And whether leadership's necessarily the correct word for that, I still kind of think that's okay, but I think it's more even if we take the word to the side, what's the meaning behind it? And the meaning behind it is how do we get our people to do the best version of themselves, be their best in the workplace, and deliver the most value from an economic point of view as well.
So just something to throw out there, organisations are the modern day tribe. That's how I view it. And this is interesting because there's something we've been unpacking a lot at Tiku Iwi Development Trust as we look in the Tupu program and focusing on relationships with employers that our participants transfer to after the 12 months. It can be a bit jarring because we've got them in this one environment. and then they're moving into another environment. So we want to, work and collaborate, similar to what you're doing. I like that you're focusing on engagement. I find it's much more enduring than motivation, and can look at it in relation to me and my staff, me and my organisation, values engagement between me and my managers, and look at those relationships. But kaitiaki might be the word that we use. You're a kaitiaki of people. Now, I use the word tribe because by virtue of the amount of time we hang out together at work more than our families, most of the times our eyes are opener in that environment. And in New Zealand, I think we tend to have an organisational culture of traditional professionalism, which is rooted and based in values that are Eurocentric and Western. And as a Māori person in those organisations, I guess the implicit messaging can be that, well, these values are superior to yours because we're using them and because we're implementing them. And that can have an impact on people's sense of cultural identity because their values are not being openly embraced within the environment that they spend most of their waking hours in. And so what we want to do, I guess I've travelled around the world, Afghanistan as well, and when I met people who knew who Māori were, they would talk about our values when it came to relationships and people and being respected. So to me and to us, it does make sense that in the organisation we are looking at those cultural values frameworks and bringing them in so that organisations, which essentially are just a bunch of relationships, are stronger. Because what we don't want is for people to come to organisations and feel that they're chewed up and spat out at the end of the day, going home to their families, and what is then the spillover effect into the family life. So yeah, also not a question there, just the sound of my own voice.
I love that so much. I am so sorry, I'm just going to say some stuff too because I feel like it. I really believe in this idea of bringing your whole self to work. So this old kind of idea that you come to work and then you be professional, like whatever that means, and you kind of like leave your personal stuff. I'm like, no, we're whole people. So how do you bring your whole self, which includes your culture, your family, everything that's important to you, that has to be valued in the workplace, and that's belonging. And so in the third principle, which is about building teams, and part of that is creating belonging. Belonging is how do we value and include everything that person brings to the table, and don't make them feel that they've got to adjust themselves a little bit to fit into this. It's no, they are here, and how do we value all of them? So I think we're sort of on a similar page there.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I have read the report. I really liked it. Thank you. So it's nice to hear a little bit about what's happening in the future. When I remember looking at the principles, and there were 6.5 principles, which was a bit funny. I didn't quite understand why 6.5 existed and wasn't 7. In the book, principle 6.5 is resilience.
Oh, that might have been like there would have been 5 subsections of number 6.
Ah.
Maybe. There was like each one had some subsections.
We sort of dug in, so each
It's
one
on another
sort of
page.
talked
Anyway,
about-
I read them, and I could absolutely see how, as a framework, it could be really used well by Māori and for Māori. So I guess the challenge to you is to make sure that the stuff's not in there, but it could lead to some really good work for Māori, I felt. So my challenge for you is to keep that up. And I guess the work that Josh is doing is actually probably quite critical to that. I mean, as we go around with our engagement with Māori, having their own people as leaders on their land is really, really important. But I guess the other thing that you can't forget is that it's also got to help people that are not Māori to be good leaders to Māori rangatahi in particular, and help grow them. And, I was, my first 3 professional jobs, I was the only Māori in the whole organisations. It's really, really lonely, and I've never had a Māori leader in the workplace. I got to be 40 before I went to work somewhere where people bothered to try and say my name properly. That's how isolating it can be. I don't want other people to have to grow up work-wise like that.
I think that's so important. And again, that's where leadership's about actually understanding your people. And so Chris often uses the phrases like, it's a bicultural foundation in a multicultural environment. So yes, we've got Pākehā and Māori, but we've also got Filipino workers and we've got Indian workers. And how do we teach our leaders to be good leaders of people from all different backgrounds?
Sorry, just tēnā kōrua, Alan and Chris. I just wanted to acknowledge the question or the what was posited about leadership and also your most excellent response to that, Chris. And sort of along the same lines, it's come up a couple of times today and it's making me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not sure if it's a question to you or to generally people in the audience who want to answer, but it's around professionalism. It's come up a couple of times and there's been the idea of letters being attached to that. That makes me exquisitely uncomfortable. I've got letters behind my name and I'm terribly unprofessional quite often. So, yeah, I was going to add an expletive in there to, case in point, but I thought best not. So I'm interested to hear your views on that. It did come up in your presentation, but not yours alone. I've been in, we all have, right? You've been in places where these people stand up and you go, that is leadership in action, that is professionalism, that is mana, that is stuff that I can't wrap good words around, but you feel it. And I would hate for anything that falls out of these conversations or where we think our direction is going to ever step in the direction that professionalism means anything other than all that intangible stuff rather than a few ridiculous letters after your name, which I have. So I'm not discrediting anyone who has a whole lot. Good on you. Okay, have I offended anyone? Good. Sorry, not sure if there's a question in there, but go.
I love, that's why I even said before, like whatever professional looks like, and it's not kind of necessarily a person in a suit is sometimes the case. The letters bit, I take your point. I do think though that when people do some work or training and then they're like, yes, I've earned something, I've achieved something, and it's good to have that recognised. And maybe it doesn't have to be letters after your name or a pin. We're not quite sure what the answer is. But if you do that learning and you grow as a person, it is good to have that kind of captured so that you can be like, yeah, I've now got this, and I can show the next employer I've earned this thing, therefore I'm going to add value to you, and that does create a sense of, yeah, I've got a professional career. So
yeah, I think letters and things like that, just symbols perhaps, they're not the essence of professionalism, which I think is perhaps what you're saying, and I agree with you. But a profession is, a body or a sort of a discipline that people achieve something, whether it's lawyers or accountants or whatever it is. They're self-policing normally, and so really that comes down to the heart of behaviours and how we are custodians of our own sort of profession or vocation. So, yeah, I feel it's about behaviours. I feel that sometimes we can attach symbols to that so that people can recognise things. I also think that there's an argument to be had for us to be able to have some confidence and have others sort of see who we are when they're looking from the outside in. So, an admission, I spent a long time in the army, and the outside impression back in the 90s was that we were just like gorillas with dragging our knuckles along the ground and sort of, we could lift heavy things maybe. And we went through an education and sort of a professionalising process. We didn't sort of call it that, but that was sort of how it went, so that our people got educated and qualified. We actually invested seriously into leadership, and that became an X factor for a range of other sort of improvements. Not saying they're perfect, because they're not, but that was sort of a journey that I think gave us more influence when it came to getting things done or better outcomes for New Zealand. So I think the heart of your question, I absolutely agree with.
I just wanted to back up some of the people that were talking about the inclusiveness of Māori and Pacifica, and also as someone who's potentially on the spectrum with autism, my son's got autism and I've tested for it as well. I've worked for myself for the past decade because I can't fit into organisations. I trip over the politics and it's better if I work for myself. And so a lot of people will miss out on the innovation and the different thinking, which I hope you agree that I've brought with some of the projects and the stuff that I've done, because I don't fit into that inclusiveness thing. One of the things I was wondering, this is an actual question, is, do your leadership competencies include how to encourage innovation or manage change? And I don't mean change management like make people redundant. I mean actually manage change with society changing and that kind of thing.
Can I answer the first bit of it, and then I'll hospital pass to Chris the second bit. So thank you so much for sharing the neurodiversity. I think that's so we've kind of just talked about ethnic diversity today, but diversity is so much more than that, right? Like it's, people of, able-bodied or not, it comes to all these different things. And so if the idea, one of the principles of leadership is know people. So it's get to know them for who they are, what they bring to the party. And so I think it's a shame when you've said, organisations have missed out on you, right? Because you said that you didn't fit in. Well, they're idiots, because they should have valued what you bring and then help you to feel that you actually belong and are included in that place, as opposed to, not fitting in. But I'll give Chris the harder question, which was the second part.
Innovation?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess this is where we talked a little bit before about there's different, I'll say genres is probably a better word for it, or audiences for how we express leadership. And so in the innovation entrepreneurship, that's a lot more about purposeful risk-taking, and there's a different sort of set of skill sets, sort of different ways of influencing, sort of attracting funders, selling the big idea, which you might be slightly different if you were in an advocacy role or something like that, where you're bringing people around, sort of trying to get a common voice on something, or maybe you're doing a community enterprise, might be slightly different.
I was thinking more of growing systems, looking at bringing in laser zapping weed tractor implements, or is that worth the? Is there a value to it against the money of it, and how do we trial that, and that kind of innovation? Are we going to fall behind if we don't go to automated system or that kind of innovation?
So there is probably a spectrum here where we're talking about leadership, which is more the people skills and teamwork and so forth. Obviously, when you apply that in a context, there might be some technical or managerial skills that you have to bring with that, which might. So we're not going to try and be all things to all people. Mm-hmm. I think otherwise you'll try and boil the ocean. So does that?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a leadership overlay in everything we do, but leadership's there's more things than just leadership. Yeah. And we're got a little big sign.
Out of time. Okay. Thank you.